History has a dark sense of humor. It takes a place like the Ottoman Imperial Harem and lets us imagine it as a paradise of pleasure. But peel back the silk curtains, and you find not a sanctuary but a psychological laboratory. A place where hundreds of women were bound by a set of rules so ingenious in their cruelty they could only have been perfected over centuries. We are not here to talk about the fantasy. We are here to document the madness. These are the 44 rules that turned a palace into the world's most beautiful prison. 1. The Valid Sultan, the absolute ruler of the harem. Let us begin by dispelling a myth. The ultimate authority within the harem was not the sultan. It was his mother, the Valide Sultan. She was the grand architect of this gilded cage, the mistress of its fortunes and its fates. She commanded its vast wealth, sanctioned every punishment, and presided over a web of spies that would ensnare a phantom. To displease her was to invite a swifter and more certain ruin than even the sultan could deliver. All life within the harem orbited her will. 2. The rule of the Gazda, one in the eye. Beauty was a formal rank. A woman did not simply catch the sultan's fancy by a trick of the light. Such a moment was a formal, recognized step on the treacherous path to power. A woman who captured his attention was elevated to the rank of Gazda, literally, the one in the eye. This was no mere compliment. It was an official promotion. With this new title came superior chambers, a retinue of servants, and a greater stipend. It marked her transition from an anonymous face to a player in the great game, a fact her rivals would note with sharpened senses. 3. The chief black eunuch, the harem's gatekeeper and jailer. The most powerful man within the harem's confines, save the sultan himself, was the chief black eunuch, the Kuzlar Asa. This figure was a true kingmaker, for he held the keys to the inner world. He controlled all access, served as the sole bridge between the sultan and his women, and possessed the unwavering ear of the Valide Sultan. A word from him could elevate a girl from obscurity. His silence could condemn her to it forever. His position made him the most feared and respected man in the palace after his master. 4. The quarantine and inspection rule, a humiliating welcome. Before a new woman could join the harem's ranks, she endured a dispassionate and humbling ordeal. She was first placed in quarantine, a period of isolation to ensure no pestilence crossed the threshold. Following this, she was subjected to a meticulous inspection. Stripped bare, she was examined by senior women and the chief eunuch for any physical flaw, and most crucially, for proof of her purity. This was not a medical procedure, it was a ritual of possession, the first act in erasing her former self and marking her as palace property. 5. The mandatory harem university. Curriculum, an academy of submission. A life of idle beauty was a fiction. Every new woman was enrolled in a demanding course of study within the palace. This was not a place of enlightenment, but an academy for the art of perfect submission. She was taught the Turkish language, the elegant scripts of calligraphy, the delicate arts of music and dance, and the labyrinthine rules of palace etiquette. The purpose was singular: to transform a foreign girl into a flawless, cultured, and utterly obedient ornament for the imperial court. 6. The renaming ceremony, erasing your past by force. Her name, her family, her homeland, all were forfeit. Upon entering the harem, each woman was given a new name, a poetic Persian word intended to reflect her most pleasing quality. Spring rose, smiling one, full moon. This was no honorific. It was a profound act of psychological severance, cutting the final thread to her previous life. She was no longer a person with a history. She was a new creation of the palace, a beautiful vessel with no past belonging only to the sultan. 7. The rule of the child. Hostages. Raising your master's bargaining chips. The harem was more than a home for concubines. It was a gilded cage for the children of conquered kings and vassal lords. These royal children were brought to court as honored guests, yet all understood their true status as hostages. They were raised in the Ottoman fashion, a constant, living guarantee of their father's loyalty, For the women, this meant living alongside and sometimes caring for the sons and daughters of men their master may have defeated in battle, a strange and constant reminder of the empire's reach. 8. The strict seniority system, the lowest rung of the ladder. Life within the harem was governed by a hierarchy as rigid as iron. One's rank dictated the quality of one's food, clothing, and lodging. Newcomers, known as a semi, occupied the very bottom. They dwelled in crowded dormitories, performing the most menial tasks, serving senior women, cleaning their chambers, running endless errands. It was a harsh system designed to crush pride and instill a desperate ambition. The only path away from a life of servitude was to climb the ladder, no matter the cost. 9. The no personal possessions rule. Nothing was yours, ever. A woman entered the harem with nothing and owned nothing within its walls. Every garment, every jewel, every silver-backed mirror was the property of the palace, loaned out according to rank and favor. A woman's entire material worth was a reflection of the palace's estimation of her. This was a masterful form of control. Should she fall from grace, her finery could be reclaimed in an instant, leaving her with nothing but a simple shift and the crushing realization of her own powerlessness. 10. The mandatory forgetting of your family. Loyalty by amputation. The bonds of blood were considered a threat to the singular loyalty demanded by the palace. A woman was expected to amputate all emotional ties to her former family. Her new and only family was the House of Osman. To speak too often of one's past, or to show signs of homesickness, was to be marked as weak-willed and, more dangerously, of questionable devotion. Such sentiment was a flaw that could halt a woman's rise before it had even begun. 11. The rule of silence, the language of silver clogs. The Sultan's approach was often announced not by a herald, but by a sound. He wore particular wooden clogs, or nailin, sometimes inlaid with silver. The distinct clicking of these shoes on marble floors was a signal for immediate and absolute silence. Conversations would cease, and women would vanish into alcoves or press themselves against walls, averting their gaze. To look upon the Sultan unbidden was an act of profound disrespect. His very footsteps commanded the silence of a god. 12. The Golden Road, the Sultan's secret commute. A private, guarded corridor known as the Golden Road, or Altın Yol, connected the Sultan's personal chambers directly to the harem. This secret passage allowed him to move between his public and private worlds, unseen by the court. No one knew which woman he intended to visit, a precaution that stifled gossip and preempted the bitter sting of jealousy among the hopeful. It was his personal path into the heart of his most private domain. 13. The hamam ritual, where hierarchy met naked gossip. The bathhouse, or hamam, was the harem's great social theater. Yet even here, shrouded in steam, the iron rules of hierarchy held fast. Senior women were attended to first, bathed by junior servants with the finest soaps. It was also the one place where whispers could flow freely. Away from the ears of the eunuchs, it was in the humid air of the hamam that alliances were forged, reputations were systematically destroyed, and secrets were traded like currency. 14. The kiss the hem. Rule. Worship, do not speak. One did not address the Sultan. One waited to be addressed. For a woman of lower rank, to speak without invitation was unthinkable. The ultimate gesture of reverence was an act of ritual submission. Upon his entrance, women were expected to sink to their knees and press their lips to the hem of his robe or the very carpet upon which he was about to tread. It was a constant physical reinforcement of the immeasurable distance between his station and theirs. 15. Forbidden male presence. Even the doctor was blindfolded. No man, excepting the Sultan and his eunuchs, could enter the harem's sacred precinct. This law was absolute, leading to practices that bordered on the absurd. If a woman required a physician, the man of science would be led through the corridors blindfolded. He would be permitted to conduct his examination only by touching her wrist to feel her pulse, or perhaps by examining a part of her body through a thin veil, never laying his eyes directly upon her. The sanctity of the place trumped even the needs of medicine. 16. The ultra-paranoia rule. Poison was everywhere. The fear of poison in the palace was a palpable, living thing. It was not merely a matter of the imperial food tasters sampling every dish. The paranoia was woven into the very fabric of life. High-ranking women employed their own tasters. It was even believed that garments could be laced with contact poisons. To thwart this, a single silver thread was sometimes woven into the sultan's robes, with the belief that it would tarnish and reveal the presence of arsenic, turning his attire into a warning system. 17. The rule of the emotional mask. Happiness was mandatory, all else was forbidden. A woman's face did not belong to her. It belonged to the palace. The most fundamental rule was the mandatory emotional mask. She was required to project an aura of serene happiness at all times, as her joy was considered a reflection of the sultan's magnificent rule. But this was only half the equation. Any unauthorized emotion, such as sadness, anger, frustration, or jealousy, was treated as an act of treason. It was an insult to the sultan's generosity. So she smiled while her heart broke and looked serene while her rival was promoted. 18. The information lockdown rule. Your mind was the only escape. The harem's walls were not just physical, they were informational. To ensure total isolation, the palace enforced a brutal lockdown on all communication. An absolute ban on unauthorized letters meant no contact with the outside world. Getting caught was a death sentence, but it went deeper. The three-person conversation rule meant two women were rarely allowed to speak alone for fear of conspiracy. This created an atmosphere of complete distrust, where even a friendly chat was a potential act of treason. 19. The rule of strategic debt. Borrowing was a fool's bargain. Money was power, and debt was a silken chain. While women received a stipend, it was often insufficient for the grand gestures of gift-giving and adornment necessary for advancement. One could borrow from a senior woman or a powerful eunuch, but this was a fool's bargain. The terms of the loan were designed to be ruinous, ensuring the borrower could never escape. Once indebted, a woman became the lender's pawn, her will no longer her own. She could be ruined at a moment's notice. 20. The "you are scenery" rule. Eye contact was treason. Unless you were a woman of the highest rank, and the sultan was addressing you directly, to meet his gaze was an act of shocking insolence. It was seen as a challenge, an assertion of self that was utterly forbidden. As he passed, all eyes were to be lowered to the floor in deference. This rule served as a constant reminder of the chasm between them. A woman was a feature of the magnificent scenery, and the scenery, it was understood, did not stare back. 21. The bedchamber ritual. A multi-step procession to power. A summons to the sultan's bedchamber was no simple invitation. It was a ceremony, a multi-act play of power and submission. The chosen woman would be bathed, perfumed, and adorned in the finest silks by a host of servants. She would then be led down the golden road to the imperial quarters. Upon entering, tradition dictated she approach the bed from the foot and crawl in, a final gesture of her utter subservience. The entire affair was theater, designed to magnify the sultan's power. 22. Motherhood was a trap. The paradox of raising a prince. A mother's natural instincts were a dangerous liability in the harem. To bear a son was the highest achievement, but it was also the beginning of a lifelong nightmare. Mothers adhered to two unwritten laws of survival. First, the one mother, one son rule. They would try to have no more sons, concentrating all their hopes and political capital on a single heir. Second, the rule of intentional mediocrity. They would carefully manage their son's education, ensuring he never appeared too brilliant or too popular, lest the reigning sultan see him as a threat to be eliminated. 23. The golden prison rule. A baby was a promotion and a life sentence. Giving birth to a prince was the single greatest promotion a woman could achieve. Her status, wealth, and power would explode overnight. But this promotion came with a terrifying catch. The moment she was confirmed pregnant, she was put under the pregnancy isolation rule. Locked away in special chambers, watched 24 hours a day, with every meal inspected and every visitor screened. She was a precious incubator, but also a prisoner in a gilded cage, protected from rivals who would gladly see her fail. 24. The ultimate punishment, death by drowning in a sack. For the gravest of crimes, such as treason or infidelity, a special form of execution was prescribed. It was considered taboo to spill the blood of one who had been intimate with the Sultan. Therefore, the condemned woman would be bound, placed within a heavy sack, and cast into the cold waters of the Bosphorus. It was a silent, bloodless end that left no trace, a chilling reminder of the ultimate price for defiance and a method that honored a technicality even in death. 25. The social death sentence, the rule of forced shunning. Not all punishments were for the body. The most insidious were for the soul. For a lesser offense, a woman could be condemned to a living death. By order of the Valid Sultan, she would be shunned. No one was permitted to speak to her, to look at her, or to acknowledge her presence in any way. She would eat her meals in silence, a ghost surrounded by the living. It was a method of breaking a woman's spirit far more effectively than any physical blow. 26. The power of gossip. Your reputation was life or death. In this hermetically sealed world, a woman's reputation was her most vital asset and her greatest vulnerability. Gossip was not idle chatter, it was a weapon. A carefully planted rumor of disloyalty, a hidden illness, or a questionable past could destroy a woman's prospects forever. The eunuchs served as the primary couriers of this information, carrying whispers to the Valid Sultan. One's survival depended on a constant, vigilant defense of one's own story. 27. The banishment to the Old Palace. A velvet exile. What became of the harem when a sultan died? Its members were swiftly bundled up and dispatched to the Old Palace, a less grand establishment across the city. This was a forced retirement into obscurity. Though they were provided for, their influence, their luxury, and their relevance vanished in an instant. The new sultan would install his own court, and the women of the previous reign would live out their days in a quiet, velvet-lined exile, their time in the sun forever over. 28. The invisible women, the fate of the unchosen ones. What of the women who never caught the sultan's eye, never bore a child, never rose above the rank of novice? After years of service, if they were not married off to an official, they became the harem's ghosts. They were consigned to a life of servitude, attending to the more successful women or the Valid Sultan. They were a silent, constant reminder to the younger girls of the price of failure. A long, slow fade into forgotten obscurity. 29. The Freedom Trap Rule. You were freed to become a lifelong spy. The most cynical form of control was disguised as an act of mercy. Freedom. When a woman was freed and married off to a palace official, her chains just became invisible. She would receive her freedom papers, but she was now a permanent spy for the harem, expected to report on her new husband's activities and any political secrets she overheard. Her freedom was just a different kind of chain, binding her to the palace forever. 30. The Shadowing Rule. Favorites were never alone. For the women who reached the top, the reward for success was the complete annihilation of privacy. The moment you became a favorite, you were assigned a permanent shadow. A senior attendant, or Khalfa, loyal only to the Valid Sultan, would be assigned to follow you. This woman was your personal assistant, but also your personal spy. She reported on your every mood, every word, and every visitor, ensuring your growing influence could never threaten the established order. 31. The mandatory infertility. Treatment for rivals. Biological warfare. Here lay the darkest arts of harem medicine. If a rival concubine became too successful, her enemies would not always resort to overt confrontation. A more subtle war was waged. Conspiring with eunuchs or servants, they would secretly administer herbs and potions into the rival's food or drink, substances believed to induce barrenness or miscarriage. It was a quiet, vicious form of biological warfare in the unending struggle for supremacy. 32. The eunuch's veto power, the ultimate gatekeeper. Even should the sultan himself express a desire for a particular woman, her assent was not assured. The chief black eunuch possessed an unwritten but absolute power of veto. If he deemed a woman a political risk or simply harbored a dislike for her, he could ensure she was never available. He might claim she was unwell or occupied with a task, or simply arrange for another, more suitable woman to cross the sultan's path. His quiet machinations could extinguish a rising star before it ever truly shone. 33. The deaf-mute servants, living secrets with legs. For tasks of the utmost secrecy, the palace employed a unique class of servants, deaf-mutes. Known as dilsis, their value was absolute. They could not overhear sensitive conversations, nor could they spread what they saw. They served in the sultan's most private chambers and delivered clandestine messages, acting as walking vaults of the empire's secrets. They communicated through a complex system of gestures, a silent language that made the court's inner workings all the more mysterious. 34. The rule of the public birth. No privacy, even in labor. The birth of a potential heir was no private joy, but a state event. When a woman's time came, the birthing chamber would fill with official witnesses, the Valide Sultan, senior ladies of the court, the chief eunuch, and sometimes even the Grand Vizier himself. This was not a gesture of support. It was a cold, calculated measure to prevent any possibility of deceit, such as the swapping of a newborn girl for a boy. The pressure to perform under such scrutiny must have been unimaginable. 35. The politics of gifts. Every present was a weapon. In the harem, a gift was rarely just a gift. It was a statement, a test, or a trap. A present from the sultan was a mark of favor to be flaunted, but a gift from a rival was a thing to be feared. A sumptuous robe could be subtly poisoned. An exotic delicacy could be a test of one's caution. A gesture of kindness could be a silken cord of obligation designed to indebt the recipient. Every offering had to be scrutinized as if it were a declaration of war. 36. The monthly bedroom roster, procreation by schedule. The continuation of the dynasty was a matter of state, and it was often managed with the cold efficiency of a military campaign. The Valid Sultan and the chief eunuch frequently maintained a roster, a schedule determining which women would be presented to the sultan. This was not about affection, but about strategic procreation. The roster was a tool to manage the ambitions of the various women, granting or withholding favor by controlling access to the imperial bed. It was reproduction by appointment. 37. The public humiliation rule. Punishment as theater. Lesser infractions were punished in a manner designed for maximum psychological effect. Instead of a private reprimand, a woman might be subjected to a public humiliation. She could be forced to perform the work of the lowest servants before the entire harem, or be subjected to the falaka, a beating on the soles of her feet. The objective was not merely to cause pain, but to make a spectacle of her, a living lesson to all others who might consider stepping out of line. 38. The sugar waxing mandate, hairless by law. The aesthetic standards of the harem were exacting and absolute. Smooth, hairless skin was not a preference. It was a mandatory rule of hygiene and beauty, especially for any woman who might be granted the sultan's favor. Women engaged in a regular, communal ritual of hair removal using a sticky paste of sugar and lemon called adda. It was another method by which the institution exerted total control over the very bodies of its inhabitants. 39. The fashion police rule. The wrong outfit was a crime. Status was a visible thing, worn upon the skin. The harem was governed by severe sumptuary laws. Only the elite could wear the finest sable furs or certain weaves of silk. The rules extended to color. imperial yellow, or a particular shade of purple might be forbidden to all but the highest royalty. To wear a prohibited fabric or color was not a simple mistake. It was an act of open rebellion, a crime of ambition that would be punished swiftly and without mercy. 40. The rule of the ceremonial towel, the final proof of a night. After a night spent in the Sultan's chambers, the ceremony was not yet complete. The bed linens and towels from the encounter were carefully collected by attendants and presented for inspection to the Valide Sultan or her deputies. This was the final, irrefutable proof of consummation. It was a bureaucratic verification of an intimate act, a procedure to officially log the event and prevent any woman from falsely claiming the Sultan's favor to elevate her own status. 41. The rule of the royal mirror. Your reflection was a privilege. In a world consumed by appearances, the very sight of one's own reflection was a controlled commodity. Only women of the highest rank were permitted to possess large, clear mirrors in their private chambers. Those of lower status had little to no access, catching only fleeting glimpses in a polished surface or a basin of water. This was a subtle but profound form of control. By limiting a woman's ability to see herself, the palace diminished her sense of self, making her more dependent on the judgment of others. 42. The coffin die. Rule: sickness meant exile. The great fear of the harem was pestilence. An epidemic could destroy the future of the dynasty. Consequently, any sign of contagious illness was met with swift and merciless action. A woman who developed a persistent cough or a fever was immediately isolated. If she did not recover with haste, she would be permanently removed, sent away to the old palace or some other distant location. It was a death sentence to her social life and her ambitions. Good health was not a right, it was a prerequisite for existence. 43. The funeral dress code, a superstitious mandate. The death of a woman in the harem was not merely an occasion for sorrow, it was an event charged with superstitious dread. A bizarre and unwritten rule often dictated what the other women should wear. They might be required to don specific colors, not simply for mourning, but to ward off the deceased's misfortune or, in a more macabre twist, to somehow absorb any good luck she might have left behind. Even in death, a rival was still part of the relentless competition. 44. The rule of instant demotion. One mistake, and you are a servant again. Status in the harem was a fragile thing, rented, not owned. A woman celebrated as a favorite one day could be reduced to a nobody the next. A single misstep, a word that displeased the Sultan, or, more critically, the Valid Sultan, could result in an immediate and official demotion. She would be stripped of her fine apartments, her servants, and her lavish stipend, and cast back into the communal dormitories to perform the duties of a novice. It was a constant, brutal reminder that she was only ever one mistake away from ruin. So the harem was not a story of romance. It was a story of survival, written in a language of fear and silent obedience. A world where your greatest strength was a mask of utter contentment. This leaves us with the most uncomfortable question. In a system designed to crush the soul, who was more successful? The woman who clung to her humanity and was forgotten, or the one who became a monster to be remembered as a queen? Tell me who you would be in the comments. If you crave history that bites back, subscribe and hit like.